All of the comments I made about the Iliad when we started are true of the Odyssey as well. That is to say, it arises at the same historical moment and out of the same oral tradition. They are both, of course, ascribed to Homer, although, as we saw in the case of the Iliad, that idea of a single author is problematic. It is natural, I think, when we begin the Odyssey, to feel that it is both similar to, but also very different from, the Iliad. And it's worth thinking about the very beginnings of these two poems and about the ways that they stand as a kind of an opposed pair of literary texts. Consider, if you will, the first line of each poem. On the top we have the Odyssey, speak memory of the cunning hero, the wanderer. On the bottom we have the Iliad, sing goddess, the anger of Peleus' son Achilles and its devastation. If we look at the Greek or original, we have for the top Andra moi enepa musa, and for the Iliad menin aede thea. The words themselves, Andra means man, me is to me, enepa is bring, and musa is the muse. So, roughly speaking, this is telling the muse to bring this man to me. Tell me about this guy. For the Iliad, menin is wrath. It really means of wrath. So it's about wrath. Sing, aede. Thea is the goddess. And there's clearly a parallel here. Both of these beginnings are appealing to a muse. The muse and the goddess are the same. To tell the narrator about the subject. But if you look at the first word, you realize that the subject is very different. So the Odyssey is about a man, a particular man. The Iliad is about wrath. It's true that Achilles is in the Iliad, and he is, after all, a central hero, but so is Hector, and so are many other characters. We've seen many long passages dealing with individual heroes. So the Iliad is focused on a much larger story. It is a public story. It is a story then, perhaps, of wrath rather than of an individual. But the Odyssey is about one man. It's about Odysseus and his particular personal journey to return. He has men with him. His men will play parts in the story. They will be important in various ways. But we never lose focus of the fact that Odysseus is the central character whose journey itself is the subject of the work. And this has led various people to see these two poems as early patterns for larger literary genres, so that you have someone like Raymond Queneau who says every great work of literature is either the Iliad or the Odyssey, that there are just two kinds of literary works, and they fit into these two parallels, the work of sort of public stuff, the wrath work, the Iliad work, and then the personal work of the Odyssey. It's worth spending a little time thinking about the nature of this hero that we have. Who is this Odysseus? In the Iliad, we know certain things about him. We hear various stories about him. We have the epithets that are connected with him. But the very first line of the Odyssey emphasizes one particular quality. So here's our one translation we have. Speak, memory of the cunning hero, the wanderer. And this phrase, the cunning hero, the wanderer, is an attempt to translate a very puzzling and peculiar Greek word, which is palutropon. So palutropon means, well, there's the English, if you want to say it, it's like polytropon. Poly means many, as a prefix, and tropon means turns. That's where we get the word tropics from, as the sun turns on the tropics. So polytropon means many turns. But the word many turns has been interpreted in various ways. So it can mean a wanderer, somebody who's simply been around. It can also mean clever, has many sort of turns of thought. And that's why you have our translation here that says that he is both cunning and a wanderer, and both, of course, apply to Odysseus really well. We know from the Iliad that he is always looked on as somebody who is a strategist and a very thoughtful person, and he's the one who, not in the Iliad, but in later stories, invents the Trojan horse. But we also know from the Odyssey that he's going to wander around a lot, and he's going to take some time getting home. So he is a wanderer, and he's smart. If we take a look at his journey, and here's an early scholar's attempt to sort of diagram the whole thing, we see him beginning in Troy. He's trying to go back to his home, which is the island of Ithaca, right there, just to the left of Greece. We see that he does indeed have many turns in his journey. He'll turn around, go back and forth. He gets almost home at one point and has to go sort of all the way back in a major turn. So we can see that he is literally, in some ways, a man of many turns. The idea of this as a type of the individual is, in fact, part of a kind of a larger tradition in the early Greek or archaic period. One of the most common visual forms we have is this idea of the labyrinth, which is ensconced in the idea of Crete, the labyrinth of Crete. You may have heard the story of Theseus. This is actually a coin, a Cretan coin, that has a picture of the labyrinth on it. But labyrinths crop up all around the classical world, scrawled on rocks, recorded in glazes on poetry, and it's worth thinking about them as a particular sort of form of both mind and of turning. And we can actually learn to draw a classical labyrinth. So if you make the little cross here, you draw the dots. You make this, the next dot, you go around like that, and you go around like that, and then you go around like that. This is the form that usually you find. It is the classical labyrinth. It could be made square if you want, but usually it's this shape, and this is actually an image from a pictograph of a traditional labyrinth. If you go into this labyrinth, you'll notice that it is what they call unicursal. It's not a maze in the sense that there are choices as to which way to go, but before you get to the center, you will turn around and go back, and turn around and go back, and turn around and go back. So you're making many turns. This labyrinth is then sort of a common visual image, and it's also the image of the man, the individual, and the idea of the individual in this poem. It has been taken also as an emblem of mind. So it is a sort of an idea of like a cognitive pattern, and it plays an important part in our sense of cognitive archaeology and how like the idea of mind is developing here, especially if we see the Odyssey as a kind of a work that depicts the emergence of the idea of mind itself. But it's also an emblem of the city. It's frequently attributed to an individual city, the Palace of Knossos, for instance, but also Troy is frequently connected with the idea of the labyrinth. And if you actually look at the map of Troy, you realize that, like many classical cities, that the defensive part of it was arranged so that anybody attacking had to circle around and return, and thereby sort of cross under walls where they could be shot at. The word polytropon, one of the translations, of course, is simply clever, wily, or intelligent, and this finds purchase in the other epithet that we want to remember is usually assigned to Odysseus, which in this little translation here is the word strategist. The word is polymetis, and polymetis is sometimes translated as of many counsels, because the word comes from the poly again, which means many, and metis. Metis is, we've seen it before, Metis is a goddess, the goddess of wisdom, the one that Zeus swallows and gives birth to Athena through his forehead. So Metis, as just a word, simply means wisdom, but you have many wisdoms. So it's either in many counsels, we get this idea of strategist. Literally, you could also say that Odysseus is always thinking, which of course, once upon a time made him the ideal Albion alum, although apparently we've gotten rid of this phrase now. But anyway, so that's the other thing to remember about Odysseus. So we have the kind of ambiguous idea of the many-sided, many-turned Odysseus, but also the more straightforward idea that he is a wise or thoughtful person who is always thinking about what's going to happen. Keep those two ideas in mind as you begin the work, and they'll help us figure out both what's up with Odysseus, but what's up with the whole work, because if the work is about Odysseus, and Odysseus is a kind of an emblem of the individual and of the individual mind, then all of these ideas will help us figure out what kinds of thematic elements are emerging.